Insemmilkom, Sinjuri, għal darboħra nirringrazzjakom li qed issegwu l-programm. Sa nibdew bid-ġrajiet kurrenti bl-Ingliż għal dawk li ma jitkellmux bil-Malti u dawk li jpreferu l-lingwa Ingliża. Sa nitkellem ma' Segretarju Ġenerali tal-Partit Nazzjonalista Michael Piccinino.
Thank you, Michael, for accepting our invitation to come and speak to us today.
My pleasure.
I'd like to carry on. We spoke with Dr. Edward Abono last week, and we covered the case of waiters and stewards in court. I'd like to pick up what happened from last week to this week, because we've got quite a lot of viewers who don't understand Maltese or who prefer to speak English.
So this week we saw the charges being pressed in court, and we saw former Prime Minister Joseph Muscat, together with his former Chief of Staff and former Minister Konrad Mizzi, being charged on Tuesday, and then together with some other people, and then on Wednesday another set of former politicians and civil servants, together with their other people who were involved in this deal, who were charged in court. Now, of course, there was the first sitting of these cases, and now the cases will be continued in June.
What can we share with our viewers with regards to the detail of what's happening in court?
No, the first sitting is a very technical sitting, so basically it will be the prosecution presenting the charges, and then the defense, after raising many objections, and they did raise many objections, they would be able to plead guilty or not guilty, and then the sitting will be adjourned to another date. What is interesting in this case is that the defense, in both sittings, so the first sitting where there was Joseph Muscat, Konrad Mizzi, Keith Cambry and the rest, and the other sitting where there was Edward Cicluna, Chris Fern and the rest, all raised many objections, which makes one think. If someone is innocent, you would want the case to start, all the proof to be presented, and for you to be able to prove your innocence. But in this case, instead of doing that, the defense has been raising many objections, even to try and stop the case from even starting. So instead of proving their innocence in court, they're trying to raise objections, trying to prove that there are difficulties with the case to stop the case from even actually starting.
In your opinion, are these delaying tactics?
Well, of course, everyone has the right to try and do all the objections they want in court. But again, as I said, if someone believes true that they're innocent, they will just go with the proceedings and will actually invite the prosecution to, as fast as possible, present all the evidence and proof to be able then to rebut that evidence. And if they are in fact innocent, which they claim to be, they would be able to prove it in front of the court of law.
And what's the position of the Nationalist Party at this stage in time?
No, naturally, our position is in favor of letting the institutions do their work. So it's in favor of letting the courts do their work without any pressure, without any attacks, etc., and letting the prosecution do all their work. In our case, we're of course selling the Attorney General and Commissioner of Police. It is their duty to make sure to present the case in the best way possible to make sure that the case has the natural outcome it should have.
You're constantly together with the executive of the party fighting against corruption and organized crime. This is really not very usual just before an election.
Of course, the election took a different turn, of course, when the inquiry was finished. The inquiry ended, and it was evident from the start that Robert Abela had a copy of the inquiry. It was very evident that the Attorney General gave a copy of the inquiry to the Prime Minister, which is very odd, unusual, and outright illegal, because the Attorney General should either publish the inquiry for everyone to see or not give it to anyone. Giving the inquiry to the Prime Minister on his own, without giving it at least to the leader of the opposition, creates a political imbalance in the country. And once Malta Today published the inquiry in full, it was evident why Robert Abela did not want the people to read the inquiry. And then there were different reasons why he did not want the people to read the inquiry. First and foremost, because from the inquiry, we saw written on black and white that Robert Abela knew of the corruption, of the fraud, at least for 3 years now. 3 years ago, he was informed in writing by people who were involved in the deal that there was corruption and fraud, and he turned a blind eye, and not only, he kept on defending them publicly and kept on giving them millions from your taxes. That's the first thing. Secondly, he knew because he had read it that there was proof of wrongdoing, so he didn't want people to read that. And thirdly, we also read from the inquiry that government institutions under the watch of Roberta Bella as Prime Minister tried to stop the inquiring magistrate together with her experts from doing her job. So for example, Identity Malta did not give the information which the magistrate was asking for. And this can be seen through a number of different government authorities.
You mentioned Prime Minister Roberta Bella turning a blind eye. May I refer to Professor Edward Cicluna, who was the Minister of Finance at that time. What can you share with us? What's your opinion?
So let's start from the present day. So Edward Cicluna is nowadays the Governor of the Central Bank of Malta, which is a very prestigious and important role for the country. Very important for the economics, well-being of the country and stability, and very important for the country's reputation. So first and foremost, today, Edward Cicluna should do the right thing and be able to defend himself as a private individual. But he did not do that, so on Wednesday, he went up to court and answered for the charges, not only as Edward Cicluna, but as Edward Cicluna, the Governor of the Central Bank of Malta, which we fear will have repercussions on the reputation and economic stability of the country. So that's what's happening now. Secondly, what was happening when Edward Cicluna was Minister of Finance, and what does the Minister of Finance do? So the Minister of Finance approves government payments, presents the budget, and gives out the money. So the corruption which was being paid out from this deal was being paid out from the budget presented by Edward Cicluna, from the money which he signed off to be paid off to Vitals and Stewart, and then which were split off between all those who were involved in the corruption and fraud. So Edward Cicluna cannot claim that he wasn't part of it, because Edward Cicluna, as a minimum, approved all this when all of the country knew that the deal was wrong. Daphne Caruana Galizia had written about the deal, about the corruption, about how the government was working behind everyone's back, even before the deal was announced and signed. So no one could claim that they were not aware of what was going on. Edward Cicluna cannot claim ignorance, because Daphne had warned them before this had even started, and yet he gave them millions.
So ultimately, without Edward Cicluna approving and signing off on all these millions, it wouldn't have happened.
The budget every year, the government budget, it's presented by the Minister of Finance. Edward Cicluna was the Minister of Finance. So he was the one giving out the money, distributing the money, and cornering of the money for Vitals and Stewart.
How would you compare his reaction to the charges in comparison to, let's say, Dr. Chris Fearn, who was the Minister of Health?
First and foremost, I don't think Edward Cicluna even reacted to the charges publicly. He just spoke briefly before going to the courthouse, where he said that he will not leave his role, and he will stay put, getting the money from our taxes, even now that he's accused of being part of this fraud. But Chris Fearn, on the other side, was first and foremost Parliamentary Secretary for Health, and then Minister for Health, and Deputy Prime Minister during the length of the saga. Chris Fearn, when there was a transfer between Vitals and Stewart, is on record saying, now we're done, this is sorted, no more problems, because this is the real deal. What he described as being the real deal was found to be part of fraud and corruption, both by the court, the first court of civil jurisdiction and the court case which Adrian Delia filed to get the hospitals back, both by the Court of Appeal and now also by a magistrate who was doing a criminal investigation. So Chris Fearn, as Minister for Health, it was literally his duty to make sure that the health services get their money's worth, that we get the best health service available. Chris Fearn said in his testimony, part of the inquiry, that he realized that while he was negotiating, there were parallel negotiations being done between Vitals and Stewart and Conrad Mitzi. So even though he realized there was something wrong, that Conrad was negotiating parallelly, he still went along. He did not stop the deal. He did not go to cabinet and say, listen, this is corruption, I'm not going to be part of it, I'm going to stop it. Neither did he vote with the opposition when the Nationalist Party presented once, twice, 3 times motions to scrap the deal and stop the money passing through Vitals.
In your opinion, what impact does this have on the business community, on new investment from abroad, and in general on the public?
So first and foremost, let's start from the public, because I think the public is the most important person around. The taxpayers is the patient who goes to the hospital, and is everyone which is affected by this deal. So that's the first and foremost. I think the problem with all of this which is going on is that the public loses trust more in institutions. The attacks by the Prime Minister on the judiciary, on the media, and on civil society are a big problem because they sow tension inside the community. So I think that's a big problem. When it comes to the business community, of course, when it has come that there was people in government being involved so deeply in corruption and fraud, unfortunately, and I said this with a very heavy heart, it has an impact on the trust, on the faith which the business community will have on the institutions and on the way the government operates. So as a nationalist party, as Partit Naționalista, we will work to help build Malta's reputation from scratch.
From what we've seen last week, it seems that former Prime Minister Joseph Muscat still has a very huge following.
Joseph Muscat was Prime Minister for, I think, 8 years, almost 9 years. He did get his results. Of course, that doesn't compensate for the justice system. The justice system decides whether someone is guilty or not guilty. In our opinion, there has to be the course of justice, which has to take its course. And then, of course, the jurors eventually, if it gets to that, will decide whether Joseph Muscat is guilty or not. And at the end of the day, no one is above the law. No one. Irrespective of if you're a former prime minister, a former minister, a permanent secretary, a former governor of the central bank, a common citizen, everyone at the end of the day has his day in court, and then the courts decide whether you're guilty or not, and you are sentenced or not accordingly.
We are in the week of the elections for the European Parliament and also the local councils. What impact does all this have on the electorate?
So, I would rather be here in election week speaking about the cost of living, on healthcare, on traffic, on the environment. But unfortunately, the campaign has been taken over by the events which have come out of the inquiry. So I would rather be speaking to you how the Nationalist Party has solutions to problems such as the cost of living, how we won't tax the cost of living allowance, how we will give tax credits, those businesses who employ people and who will have to have more cost because of COLA. I would love to be speaking to you about how we will establish a national fund to help importers and exporters and much, much more. However, unfortunately, we're here discussing the Vitals inquiry. So what impact the inquiry will have on the general public, I think is very hard to say because it is a very volatile situation. However, of course, I think it brought to the public also the extent of corruption which went down in the Labour Party, in the Labour government during the last 11 years.
Michael, there are many foreigners, as we all know, living in Malta. Some of them have lived here for 10, 20 years and have received their votes, their right to vote. But quite a lot of people say that they're not really that interested. What would you say to these people who've made Malta their home?
As you have explained, there are a number of European citizens who are permanent residents of the country who have a vote in either both the local and European elections or the local councils alone. Well, my appeal to them is to actually go out and vote. If you won't vote and decide for yourself, others will decide for you. And if you are living here permanently, you have made Malta your home. So might as well have a part of the decision-making process which the country is having. Partit Naționalista has a number of proposals, both on a European level. We have proposals focusing on how our MEPs will focus in the European Parliament. We have proposals on a national level when it comes to local councils, and we have a program for every single locality. So, for example, on a national level, when it comes to local council, we're saying that first and foremost, we will make sure that we'll make a study to see a carrying capacity study for every locality. So we'll see how much people the locality can have, and it's how much we need to invest infrastructure-wise so to be able to carry all those people and make sure that the locality is future-proof when it comes to its infrastructure. We are also saying that we will make sure that there is better traffic management. So there won't be all the roads leading up to a locality closed at the same time. And thirdly, we're also saying that we need to make sure that the environment will be taken care of, and when it comes to, for example, garbage collection, that we will make sure that the garbage will be collected properly, even more than once in the same day if need be.
That's where the local councils come in.
Of course, it's a local council election, and more importantly, for those of them who are living in Gozo, we are making a pledge that our local councillors will make sure that Gozo will keep its traditional characteristics. Gozo as a whole and every locality inside Gozo. That is one of our major pledges when it comes to Gozo on behalf of the Nationalist Party.
How important is to keep democracy in this country?
I think keeping the country democratic is the first and basic principle of all of us who believe in democracy. So if you want to enhance democracy inside the country, my appeal to you is go out and vote next Saturday and vote for all the candidates contesting on behalf of Partit Naționalista who is a party which believes in democracy, who believes in the rule of law, who believes in human rights, and who wants to make sure that good governance is at the forefront of our policies in government, in local councils and the European level.
This, of course, won't change the government in Malta, but it could send a message to people who are governing.
Of course, on the 9th of June, Roberta Bella will still be Prime Minister, the Labour Party will still be the party in government, but giving a strong mandate to the opposition moving forward in local councils and on the European level will also give a message to the government. A message to the government that it cannot keep on going on like nothing happened. It cannot go on as if it can do whatever it wants and no one can stick up to it. It will also empower the opposition to make sure it represents you even better.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you for your time.
Signori, grazzi li segwejtu l-intervista li kelli ma' Michael Piccinino, is-Segretarju Ġenerali tal-Partit Nazzjonalista. Infakkarkom li din il-ġimgħa se jkunaw l-elezzjoni tal-Parlament Ewropew u tal-Kunsilli Lokali u għandkom bżonn toħorġu tivvutaw. Tridu tivvutaw għal kandidati kollha, jiġifieri tagħtu il-vot l-ewwel in-number 1 lil dak il-kandidat li tippreferu u tibqgħu sejrin u tifqu fin-numru 8. Jekk għandkom xi kummenti jew tridu aktar informazzjoni, għad baqalkom biex iċċemplu lelkom jew in-numru li jidher fuq l-iskrin biex issaqsuna u aħna nkunu nistgħu ngħinunkom. Grazzi li segwejtu, jiena Hogg għal Net TV.